So you always want to buy certified disease-free, pest-free. So right now on the Front Range, you guys have a really bad case of Japanese beetles. And of course, we're going to talk about insects later today, but this kind of gets into not only is it we're looking for disease-free plants, we're also looking for insect-free plants. There's lots of damaging insects on the horizon. Where I grew up in Pennsylvania, they're finding the lanternfly. The spotted lanternfly is hitting all kinds of trees, including fruit trees. So we're on the lookout for some of these, and hopefully our dryness will prevent some of them from thriving here. But unfortunately, the Japanese beetle has made it. It made it here once. We were really lucky in that it was caught very early on in Palisade. And what ended up happening was they treated every single lawn in the town of Palisade for Japanese beetle, and they were able to eradicate them. We do typically see at least one come in, so that's coming in probably via vehicle, and so they do hitchhike. And so there is now, I think CDA might have removed it, but we did have in place that if you were on the Front Range and you were going to sell trees or any plants that might have Japanese beetle to the western slope, it went through a separate inspection. So it's good to kind of know about these different inspections. And when you're buying trees, like say online, you want to know that these are disease and pest free, so that when you get them, that you're not bringing a new issue to our area or to your yard. And so you want to think about those things. Also down in the San Luis Valley, they have a protection. They don't grow any prunus varieties of trees, so that would be your plums and your cherries. I think that's right. I'm having a botany brain freeze here, but definitely the plums. And so what happens is some of the insects on the plums carry a disease to the potatoes. And so that's why in San Luis Valley, you really don't see any fruit trees. It's because they're protecting the potato crop. And so there's actually a quarantine there. So sometimes you might call or order plants online and may tell you, oh, there's a quarantine in Colorado. No, there's a quarantine in San Luis Valley. I've had to call the CDA in the past and say, can you talk to these people and correct them that it's not the whole state, it's just the San Luis Valley. So anyway, know that those things exist out there. So nurseries and garden centers are typically a better place to get your fruit trees than go into like a big box store like Home Depot or Lowe's. You're gonna just not get as good a root stock. And so the garden center should have more of an idea of what root stock is on the trees. And we're gonna get into root stocks. And how important those are and why you should care about that. But you're just going to get a tree that's more hardy and it's going to live longer if you go to the nurseries, garden centers, or those specialists online. So plan ahead too, and you want to look at the pollination needs of the trees. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute, of what needs to be cross-pollinated and what is a good self-pollinator. And you want to make sure that you match their bloom time too, so there's an overlap in bloom time. If one's blooming early and one's blooming late and they don't overlap, they're not going to pollinate each other. So another reason why you could possibly not get fruit if it requires to be cross-pollinated. And that microclimate could change too when things bloom. So just be cognizant of that. It's pick something that is going to be overlap pretty well. Pollination, I don't know why I have size there. Size certainly will matter with rootstock, and that's going to have an importance there. And of course, why do we want that tree? What's the whole reason? You're going to look for a species that's going to give you what you want. Certain peaches, like Alberta, is a great canning peach, but is a horrible one to ship. And so that's one reason you don't see as many Albertas in the grocery store anymore, even though they're just wonderful as far as fresh eating and canning. And so think about why you want this fruit tree in the first place and do your research on the different varieties of what is going to be the best fresh eating, what's going to be the best for freezing. And that information's out there. So did you know at one point there was actually 20,000 varieties of apples in the world, and that it takes 25 different characteristics of the apple and the tree to identify them. So when somebody brings you a red apple into the Master Gardener desk, you can truly say, I have no idea. I mean, sometimes we can look at pictures and look at the shape and the stippling and the striping and the flesh color. All these different things go into figuring out, why. Sorry, I just got a message. My internet for some reason is not stable, so hopefully you still hear me. But anyway, there's lots of characteristics to identify an apple, so it's very hard for something come in. Oh, that's a Rome, or whatever. And for peaches, there are about 1,000 cultivars, many of them dating back about 4,000 years in China, and they actually have a bunch of them in a library. So it's pretty cool that they've kept some of that germplasm alive. So factors also to consider in looking at the varieties would be, of course, flavor, hardiness, right? If you're in an area that fruit trees aren't as hardy, you're of course going to want to try the hardiest you can find. Are you going to store those apples? So do they store well? And is there disease resistance? Because some of them might be resistant to certain diseases that we'll go over this afternoon. So storage is one of the reasons too why we don't have as many varieties of apples anymore. We have closer, I think, to 10,000 varieties worldwide. The hard cider trade is popular right now, so that's actually bringing back some of these older apple varieties because they might be better for cider than they are for eating and other things. Pies, believe it or not, pie making and eating is on the decline. So some of those apples have gone by the wayside as well. But, so anyway, just know that there's tons of them out there. There's a couple groups actually, I think, that are trying to keep some of these old varieties alive. And so if you have a 50 to 100-year-old apple tree, they want to know about it, and they're cataloging, they're taking samples, they're reproducing them. So there's some effort to keep some of these old varieties that maybe Johnny Appleseed spread, going for us. So pollination. So here's kind of that list of what needs a cross-pollinator. When you need at least 2 varieties, 2 trees of the same. So sweet cherries, for example, you need to have 2 varieties that are going to cross-pollinate each other for you to get cherries. Same with Japanese plums. With pears, it depends on the variety. So some varieties you're going to need to have cross-pollinated, some you won't. And then for self-pollinators, you have the peaches, the nectarines, sour cherries. So you might have heard me say I have 1 sour cherry in the crook of my house in that little microclimate that fruits every year. It's pollinated. It pollinates itself by bees and other pollinator insects. So sour cherries, you just need 1. Plums, I have 1 plum in the front yard, and I have 1 peach in the front yard. So I have all those self-pollinating fruits together. In my backyard, though, I do have 2 apples, even though they will self-pollinate. And with a lot of these, if you do have more than 1 tree, you are going to get better pollination happening. So just in general, if you have 2, you're going to have better fruiting than if you just have 1. And I don't think there's anything else there I wanted to say about pollination. Of course, honeybees are important for pollination, but there are some natives too that also will pollinate fruit trees. So let's go on to planting. And so rootstocks. And so on the left, you see a diagram of a tree. It's just important to know that pretty much all fruit trees, in fact, most trees in general, shade trees, ornamental trees, fruit trees, are all grafted anymore. So if you look at the base of the tree, you're going to see your rootstock, which is the hardy part of the tree. It's going to help this tree be hardier in our climate. And then you have the graft union, and then you have the scion. So the scion is the tree that you want. So you might want to have Red Haven peach or Granny Smith apple. So that's the top of your tree. And then you see like an interstem in between where we don't have any branches coming out. And then, of course, the rootstock, we don't want any branches coming out from that rootstock either, because it could be something totally different and something that you might not want. So peaches, for example, sometimes are grafted onto plum or almonds, all kinds of different things. And so you might get some kind of, different plant coming from the base. So if you ever get suckers coming from below, you want to cut them as low as you can to avoid that plant taking over, because sometimes the rootstock is going to be more vigorous than the top of the tree. And these rootstocks play a huge amount into the vigor and size. We used to think that it was mainly size, and I have another slide showing you how the different rootstocks determine size, but they also affect fruit quality and quantity and hardiness and that acclimation I was talking about. So there's all different categories. There's a NC 140 rootstock trial going on in many states, we being one of them, to try out these different rootstocks. And of course, they might act differently in California than they do here. So it's good for us to have that information from across the US. So rootstocks should be of some kind of dwarfing rootstock. We don't want this tree to be 50 feet tall, a little hard for us to pick the fruit. So it's grafted on to a dwarfing rootstock of some kind. So do your homework and buy from a similar climate too. So I like to get trees, and a lot of our growers do, from a similar climate. So like Eastern Washington is very dry, has similar soils as we do. So that's a similar climate. So that would be a good place to get trees from. Of course, it doesn't always happen that way. And in the retail selection process, we don't have as many choices as our growers do that are growing, buying in hundreds to thousands of trees at a time, where we might just be buying one or two. So anyway, see if you can find something that's healthy, resistant, and similar climate. And then, let me see, we talked about the scion. So cuttings for that scion wood are typically taken in January or February when the trees are dormant. And that's typically when they do the grafting of these. They're grafting onto rootstocks that are at least 1 year old. Some of those rootstocks, though, could be coming from seedlings, or they could be also coming from cuttings. So here's an example of an old type of apple rootstock. This is Malling, and you can see there's different Mallings listed here. So you have Malling 111, 106, 7, and Geneva 30, Malling 26, Malling 9, and so on. So the first one, the Malling 111, is going to dwarf the tree by 85 to 100%. Well, depending on what the top scion is, how tall was the original tree? What would be the potential of that original tree? And so this is going to be 85 to 100% of that original tree. So probably not the best choice for a residential tree, because it sounds like that's probably going to get pretty big. The 106 is 80%. It's typically maybe a 12 to, sorry about that. I keep trying to point and I touch it and then I advance. You're going to get excellent anchoring. So see at the bottom, you see anchorage. So that means how well is it rooting out, and is it keeping that tree from falling over? And so the semi-dwarf ones, the first two, are pretty excellent at anchoring that tree. And then you'll see as you go down in size, that anchorage decreases. So this is one reason we don't see more actually full dwarfs in the orchard setting, because boy, wouldn't that be nice to just pick your trees, and not need any kind of ladder. That would be great, to have only a 4 to 8 foot tree. However, they could blow over in a good windstorm. So that's something that we want to consider too when we're looking at these rootstocks. So again, it's influencing the heighting, the rooting, the anchorage, the quality and quantity of the fruit, um, the hardiness. So it affects a lot of different things. And I apologize, my dogs are barking right now. Hopefully you can't hear them. But as Katie says, we're working from home and doing the best we can do. So planting height is going to be similar as if you were planting an ornamental or shade tree. You want to make sure that it is the graft is above the ground and that your top two scaffold roots are about 2 inches just below the ground level here. You can see here that a pole has been used to figure out where that soil ground level is and making sure that we have this tree at the proper height. So planting the tree at the proper height can avoid stress, which is really important, especially when it comes to the diseases of these trees. So we want to make sure that if you're buying a bare root tree, that you're really making sure that you dig that hole wide enough that those roots can really get spread out. If you have broken roots or roots that are just really a wild hair and way too big, it is okay to prune those. So you can prune those off so they fit into the hole. We want to make sure that that root flare rate is above the ground. You're spreading the roots. And then you can layer the soil in. You can either water as you're layering in or afterwards, but you just want to make sure that you are saturating the entire hole and you're keeping this moist. So we have, you know, a tree that's going to be viable. If you're doing a pot, just like you would plant it, just like you would an ornamental tree. So from Woody Plant class, you should have learned that you're going to actually saw off those roots that are wrapping around. So we want to avoid any grilling roots. We're going to look for those top scaffold roots, and we're going to make sure that this tree has a good start in life. With the bare roots, you're digging the hole at least as big, as wide as the root system. As you know, with the potted ones, we're looking at typically 3 times the width of the pot so we can avoid any stress from the planting. Okay, so watering fruit trees. So as I mentioned before, we need to water. These aren't something that you can just put out and leave Mother Nature take care of. So the first year, of course, is very important. So this is just a generalization, right? You want to check your own soil, your site, your exposure, your soil could be different. So this is just a generalization, but just a kind of a guideline to start with. So young trees should receive at least 3 to 5 gallons of water twice a week when they're just planted. Sprinkle or drip irrigation may be enough. You want to check the soil to ensure the moisture is at least 6 to 12 inches deep, right, of that moisture. Deep watering is essential to root development. In subsequential years, you want to water about 1 to 3 inches a year, per week in the summer months and into the fall. And then don't reduce the fall watering until the leaves actually drop off. We find that they go into winter better actually with some good moisture. And then the irrigation should be suspending following any significant rainstorms. And of course, you can look at ET rates too to help you determine, if you should be watering more or not. Of course, July should be your peak with the longer and hotter days. They're going to be needing more moisture, as with anything. And of course, these guys are fruiting pretty much from spring through fall. So that's another important reason to have watering. It is good to have kind of a consistent schedule. And we'll talk about that a little bit on some of the issues. And when we get to fertilizing today, we will talk about why it's important to have a regular schedule of watering.